Hello and welcome to Power Tips. In this video, we are going to build an Azure Functions that connects to Dataverse using managed identity. So let's get started. Okay, so I've already created an Azure function that has just one function called function1 in it. This is the default Azure Function project using .NET 6. So first thing is we want to install some packages. So let's go to our NuGet package and then let's browse for some packages. So first package that we want to install is called Azure Function extension. So I just found it right over here without even searching for it. It just appears over there. I don't know why. How did that happen? I've not seen that happen before. But yeah, so Microsoft Azure Function extension, that's the first package that we want to install. So let's go ahead and install that. Okay. Then the second function that we would need is sorry, the second package that we would need is Azure Identity. Okay, so let's install Azure Identity. Okay. And then the third package and the last package is our Dataverse package, which is our Dataverse client. Install the latest version. Okay, so we have installed whatever packages we thought we would need. First, before we go to the second step, I just wanted to give you some background. So what we want to do is we want to authenticate with Dataverse using managed identity. But what we also want to enable is that that multiple functions can use our authentication with Dataverse. So if I add function 2, function 3, function 4, all the functions should be able to connect to Dataverse using managed identity. And to enable that, we would need dependency injection, and that is what I would be showing to you. And credits go to Natraj for blogging about this few months ago. So first thing, the second thing that you want to do after installing the package is add a new class file called startup, which is a special file. So let's add startup.cs, and by default any class file that gets added is having the it has internal, so change that to public. Okay, and then we would implement something called as functions startup, which is part of this dependency injection. And this was the package that we installed. We installed Microsoft.azure.functions.extensions, and dependency injection is part of that package. So let's install that. And as soon as you install it, you'll get an error saying, hey, you have implemented functions startup, but then you haven't implemented the abstract members that are part of the function startup. So let's go ahead and then implement those members. Now, as soon as you do that, you will see that this is where we see not implemented exception. Let's go and remove it. Okay. Now, to make sure that this startup class is self-referential, or no, is the first thing that gets invoked that enables dependency injection, we want to do this. So assembly, okay, and then we call functions startup, and then open bracket, and then here we would say type of, and we would give the name of this class called startup. So we'll copy this startup and then we'll paste it here. Okay. Now this becomes a special class that can enable our dependency injection. Save it. Now, to make sure that we are able to connect to Dataverse, first we want to do is use builder, builder dot services, and then add singleton, and inside singleton we will add our Azure identity, Azure default Azure credentials. So what this enables us to do is it enables us to do the authentication using Azure credentials. So you can do your testing locally as well as on live. So now the following step is go to builder dot services dot now add singleton again, but then this time I'm going to do organization service and service client. Okay. And then brackets, and then after this I'm going to actually copy the code and then explain you how it works. Okay. So first thing is we are doing the managed, we are capturing or we are getting the managed identity based on the Azure Functions configuration. Then we are looking at the Dataverse URL to get the environment URL, and then we are initiating the cache. The cache is helpful for the tokens because it then caches the token that gets generated. And then finally we are instantiating service client based on the token, and we are missing get tokens method. We'll look at that in a moment, but then it's enabling that get token method as a provider function, then instantiate providing the URL for our environment, and then use unique instance is equal to true. Now once this service client is initiated, it's returned to the singleton service. Okay, that enables us to do that dependency injection, which we'll see in a moment. Okay. Now because we are missing this get tokens methods, so let's go and add that method as well. So that method is going to be our private method, and what it's going to do is it's going to take in 3 parameters: environments, credentials, and then memory cache. And then based on those parameters, it's going to get the so it's first going to try to get the token from the cache. If it's not available in the cache, it's going to try to get the token from the credentials service. Okay, and important is we get the access token, then the access token is returned, which goes to that token provider function, which in turn has the token to authenticate with the instance URL. Okay, so that is how your startup would look like, and this code will also be available on the GitHub repo, and the URL to that GitHub repo you can find it in the video's description. So if you look at the description of the video, you can click on it and then go to the GitHub repo. Okay. Now once you have configured your dependency injection for authenticating Dataverse using managed identity, you can go back to your function, and then let's see how you can utilize that managed identity. Okay, so first thing that you want to do is, how you have this ilogger function over here. This is also kind of using not kind of, but it is using dependency injection. Similarly, what you could do is you could just use comma and then say service client, and you can say client SV client. Okay. And then similar to how you have configured, or how the default configuration is for the ilogger, you can do private read only service client, and then underscore service client, and then you can initialize service client over here. Okay, once this is done, then you can use this in your code using underscore service client dot retrieve. So you have this retrieve method, you have the create method, you have the update method, delete. So all the methods that you have in the service, actually it has more methods than the regular iOrganization service. So yeah, that's how you configure your Azure Functions using managed identity. Now, one thing that I forgot to tell you is in our startup, we actually used an environment variable called Power Apps and then Dataverse URL. We did not configure that anywhere. So I'm going to show that to you before we end this video. So you copy this environment variable, you go to your Solution Explorer, and under Solution Explorer, under local settings, you would go in that and add that over here, and then you would then provide the URL for Power Apps. Okay. Now this is only for the local setting. This is only for local debugging. Now how it would work when the code is deployed to the Azure portal, that is a different thing. Okay, so once we have configured our Azure Functions, let's see how we can get this deployed to the Azure portal. So for that, we are going to use the Bicep file. So in the Bicep file, here I have defined some parameters, some functions, and then we are going to create a storage account, app service plan, then app insights, and then this is the default settings for the Azure Functions, and then this is where the Azure Functions is going to get deployed. Okay, so let's deploy this. So deploy Bicep file. Now, how do I get this option? So there is the extension for Bicep, so you can install that extension. So if I go to extension, search the name, should be called Bicep. Yeah, so there's a Bicep extension that enables us to do all this kind of fun stuff. So let's go deploy Bicep. Before that, let me authenticate to proper Azure instance. So Azure sign in. Okay, so now I'm signed into my Azure profile, and now I can deploy this. So keep the default name, and I get all the resources. I select the resource. I don't have a parameter. This is the value which will take the resource group's location, so I'm going to keep that. Then it is asking for the Dataverse URL, so let's enter the Dataverse URL that we had before, which is this one. Then it is asking for the application name, so I'm going to keep it as Power Tips, and then the environment, so I'm going to say demo, then the type. So these are all the things that I've defined, how my function name, my app service plan names, insight name should all get configured. So that's why these are all the parameters that I'm using, right? Power platform, and then what is going to be my storage name. So storage name, I can say it's going to be demo. Okay, and then I'm going to say, do I want to create a parameter file? I'm just going to say no, and it's going to start the deployment, and then I'm going to get a URL over here. So this is where the URL is. I can open this URL in Azure. So I go to Azure, it will show me the deployment progress. So the deployment was completed, so we can go to the resource group, and we can see that our Azure Functions was created, our App Insights was created, and everything else was created as well. So let's go back to our function app and then try to get this function app deployed as well. So publish. To Azure. Azure Functions Windows, and then we'll just search for, yeah, still searching for the resource groups. Okay, so demo, and then this is the Azure Functions, right? So just select next, and then we don't have an API management, so we'll just skip this step. And there you go. So publish. Okay, so our Azure function was just published to the Azure portal. So let's go to the portal and then check its validity. So if you go to the functions, you can see that function 1 now appears under the function, and then we have the function here as well. So the next steps is to configure or complete our managed identity functionality. Okay, so first thing is, on the Azure Functions, you would go to the configuration, and remember how we added the environment variable to our local settings. So similarly, you have to copy this environment variable name and then add it to our configuration file. Okay, so I've already added it here because this was part of my Bicep. So if I go to my Bicep file, you can see that it's part of my configuration here. Power Apps Dataverse URL, and then that is what I had asked in the environments as well, or in the Dataverse URL as a parameter. So as it was part of my Bicep file, the Dataverse URL was already set. So you can see the value here, and that completes the Azure function part. So now let's move on to the Dataverse side of things, and let's configure our managed identity in Dataverse. So in order to create a managed identity in Dataverse where our Azure functions can talk to Dataverse, you have to set up a user you have to set up an application user in Dataverse. And for that, what our friend Natraj did was he created a nice, neat PowerShell script that helps us to create that service principal user. So to execute that, I'm going to use the Windows PowerShell ISE tool and then load this file. Now again, this file is available on the GitHub repo, so you can look at the video's description and you can find this file there as well. So it's pretty simple. What it's going to do is it's going to ask you for the Azure application or Azure Functions name, and then it's going to find it Azure Functions application ID, and then it's going to ask you for the URL, for the environment URL, and then once it has the environment URL, it's going to go and create that application user in Dataverse. Okay. So as I said, we will need two things from this. So we will need the Azure Functions. So I'm going to copy this Azure Function name, and then it would need the Dataverse URL. So I'm going to copy the Dataverse URL as well. And then let's go to our ISE and then execute. So first thing, it's asking for our function name. So let's give the function name here. And then the second thing it's asking is for our environment URL. Now here it would try to authenticate to that URL. So you sign in. Now you're logged in to your Azure, and it found the subscription, found the Azure Functions application ID. And now here you enter your credentials and then hit login. And yeah, make sure that you're clicking on display list of available organizations, because at this point what it would do is it would create an application user in the organization that is through this login. So if you instead of selecting the environment that you have added here, if you select some other environment, then the application user gets created in another environments, and it becomes confusing sometimes. So make sure that you are checking this display list of available organization, otherwise it will go to the default org, and that's not what you want. So log in, and now it created the application user. Once you get this grid, it means it has created the application user. So one way to identify is you'll have to go to admin.powerplatform.com, not that one, admin.powerplatform.com. And then your environment, you would go to the users or S2S apps. You can go directly over there, and the way the application user gets created is using that hash, and then it would be followed by your function name. So in our case, it's the name is the function power tips power platform demo, so it would have the same name here, and you can see that this is the application user that got created. It doesn't have any security roles, so in order for our application user to, or our function app to go and access the data or go and create the data, or authentication would be done, but then it also needs a security role to be assigned. So I'm gonna just, because this is my demo environment, I'm just gonna go and add my system admin security role, but you should probably look at creating a security role just specifically for your application users, and not give system admin permissions. So once you have this configured, then you can and you can then test out your function. So in our function, we have not written any code, so let's go and write some code. Okay, so in our function app, let's just say we'll just pull in the name of a superhero. Okay, so first superhero, doesn't have to be anyone else. So we will write a query. So query expression. Now, if you're using query expression, it comes from Microsoft.xrm.sdk. Okay, query expression is also part of OpenAPI expression, so don't take that. Make sure that you are selecting the right query expressions from Microsoft.xrm.sdk.query. This is part of the Dataverse client dependency, so that's why you are able to get it. So query expression, and then we'll just do query expression for superhero. So pmav underscore superhero, and then query expression dot criteria dot add condition, and then we'll give the name as pmav underscore name, and we'll call it as conditional operator dot equals, and then we'll compare it with the name that is supplied in the query parameter. So that would be name. Okay, and then if you're able, and then we'll do underscore service client dot retrieve multiple, and we'll run the query expression, and we'll get the results in entity collection. And if entity collection is not equal to null, and entity collection dot entities dot count is greater than 0, then we would get that entity name, and then so the response would be so we'll just do this. Response message goes in here, and it will be string dot empty. Okay, and if I'm able to get the response message, so my response message, if I don't get the data, then my response message is going to be generic. Okay, and then if my response message if I'm able to get the data, then my response message is gonna say the name of the superhero. Okay. And then I'm going to return the response message back. So that is how my my Azure function is going to work. Now, if I want to debug this locally, I have to make sure that my AzCLI is authenticated with the Azure function subscription that I'm going to connect to. So AzCLI, there are a few ways that you can do this. So you can go to your terminal, and you can do az login. Okay, now for this you need to make sure that your Azure CLI are installed on the machine. So once you're logged in with Azure CLI, you also have to make sure that your Windows login. So you go to tools and you go to options, and then you go to Azure service authentication and account selection. Here you have selected the proper account. Okay, if those things are done, then you can just run this locally, and you can actually see the output on your local machine. So my Azure function is running locally, as you can see, localhost. And what I can do is I can pass in the parameter here. So I can say try out, and then I can pass in the name of the parameter Batman, and let's say execute. Okay, and oh, we got the error. Okay, so I figured out the mistake that I had done, and I'll explain you what the issue was. So in the startup file, what we're doing is we are actually returning iOrganization service. Okay, and because of that, we have to, in our function app, instead of using service client as a parameter, we actually have to use iOrganization service. So let me just rename this to org SVC instead. Okay, and then you use the iOrganization service as the parameter. And then you convert that organization service into service client over here, and then you are still using service client, but then from the dependency injection you are actually getting our organization service. Okay, there is because I changed this, I want to apply the code changes. So I'll go do a rebuild. So that's the only change, right? So in your parameters on the function app, you would use organization service, and then unbox it to service client. And once this is ready, we'll go and test it out. So I have this function app running locally, and let's try it out. And I'm going to give the same parameter called Batman, and then execute, and then it just executed, and let's see the output. So we got the 200 response, and then the response body says, hello Batman, this HTTP triggered function executed successfully, which works well. And then we just deployed to Azure Functions using the method that we saw previously, and you can use the Azure Functions from the portal as well. It would work similar. You already have the Dataverse URL and everything, so you don't need to do anything. Just deploy the code, execute it, and it will work fine. That's it for this video. If you have liked this video, then check out these 2 videos as well. Also, check out Power Tips playlist. Until next time.